And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, I would like to remind you you can find Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. Again, that's ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal webpage, ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that page, you'll find a chat room, you'll find the RSS feed to my articles, and you will also find the archive versions of this show. I want to remind you to go to activistpost.com, which is the website where I am a staff writer. A lot of information that comes out there on a regular basis, so stay tuned to that website. You can also find my books at thebookpatch.com and at my backup website, my personal website, brandonturbeville.com. And on that page, you'll find all of my reposted articles, all of the archive versions of this show, all the interviews I've done, and all of the other relevant information. So brandonturbeville.com, activistpost.com, and I also do the occasional article for the Progressive Gazette.com as well. So lots of websites for you to check out there on a regular basis. Now, I said when I started this show for 2014 that I was going to take an activist approach because of potential for a mass upsurge. We need to be in place to take advantage of that upsurge, and we need to be involved with that upsurge if it is going to come. And for that reason, I've decided to have two guests on tonight. Daniela Walls, who has been on the show before, who is the chair of the Tax Wall Street Party. You can find the Tax Wall Street Party at taxwallstreetparty.org. And also Kyle McCarthy, who is an activist with the United Front Against Austerity, which you can find at againstausterity.org. And with that, I'd like to welcome both of you to the show. Welcome, Daniela. Welcome, Kyle.
Hi, Brandon. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Hey, Brandon.
Hey, it's my pleasure to have you guys on, and I want to get into a lot of things here, but first we have this issue with Bill de Blasio in New York City, right? The new progressive candidate in New York City, the new mayor of New York, and you guys have done a lot of work in exposing this de Blasio character. And Daniela, you had some information about what de Blasio really is. And so in other words, I just want to turn this over to you right now so you can explain to the listeners what Bill de Blasio really is in New York and what he means for the city.
Okay, well, this is a lot of stuff that I talked about on the Webster Tarpley show back in September and October of last year. But it's amazing to me how quickly the truth is coming out about de Blasio. Much faster than it came out with Obama. De Blasio's barely a week in office. He was inaugurated on the 1st, and there's already protests, and they're growing in New York City. I think de Blasio was more than a mayoral candidate. He was a beta test for a new Democratic populism, and this mayor's race proved to the Democratic Party that if they don't get back to their roots of being populist, they're going to lose. I think our platform, we had a candidate, Randy Credico, in that race, and I think our platform was a big influence in this race, too. It really pushed all of the candidates more toward the left, and it pushed de Blasio more to the left, even if it was just rhetoric coming from de Blasio. They used de Blasio not just to speak to New Yorkers, but to determine how populism would play out to the rest of America. That's what I think. De Blasio isn't a real populist with a program or agenda. It's just words and image. But this is how they plan to renovate the Democratic Party going forward. I think that there's not a lot of excitement, after Obama, and so this is how they're planning to reinvent themselves. They're going to use the spirit of what was positive about the Democratic Party while hoping they can get away with and continue with this pro-war and pro-Wall Street nonsense that we see coming from almost every Democrat now. Like I said, de Blasio just got into office a week ago on January 1st, and there are angry protests all over the city over his appointment of Bratton as police commissioner. Bratton was the architect of stop and frisk. He was the police commissioner under Giuliani. And you have to remember de Blasio never said anything particularly progressive. The press surrounded us with hype that he was the only one of the candidates that said he would end stop and frisk, but he never actually said that he would end stop and frisk once. On the campaign trail, he always said that he would end the era of stop and frisk, and that's a much different thing. That'd be like if I said that I was going to end the era of homelessness. It doesn't mean anything. And now there are mass protests in New York over this appointment of the new police commissioner, Bratton, who was the original architect of stop and frisk, and similar racist and unconstitutional police tactics. But like I said, de Blasio never said that he would end anything. The closest he came to saying he would make any step in that direction, or in the direction of stop and frisk, was when he said he would limit the overuse of the practice. But every daily came out and said that he was the only candidate who was going to end it, which was a blatant lie and a misrepresentation. There's going to have to come a time when people stop believing, I guess, in the appearance of things and start looking at facts. I think the worst thing that we can be right now after Obama deceived us so blatantly are dupes. And right now I'd rather concentrate on the facts instead of the rhetoric, and I'd rather be wrong than a dupe anymore. So, and there's a way to go about that. I mean, the first way to differentiate whether a candidate is on the side of the people or not, left, right, or third party, is to look at where the money's coming from. De Blasio's war chest was all Wall Street banks and big Manhattan real estate developers of the worst strain. He also had the big backing of hedge fund billionaire George Soros and the wealthy van der Heuvel family, who owned The Nation magazine. Katrina van der Heuvel, the editor of The Nation, was the first to kick off the media frenzy of propaganda that followed from the New York Times and the rest of them. All the major dailies in New York were reporting exactly the same things, almost like a script. And, I've heard it said that, the media are like blackbirds. Well, they were in this case. So you want to get into a little background about de Blasio and where he's coming from? Mm-hmm. Okay. So he was pushed out of HUD, federal, Department of Housing and Urban Development, to become Hillary's campaign manager. He managed Hillary's U.S. Senate campaign in 2000. He was her campaign manager. He's tied to the Clintons at the hip. In the beginning of this campaign, Tony Podesta, who's probably Clinton's closest confidant, and Hillary's lobbyist Janice Enright, held de Blasio's earliest fundraisers. So the Clintons had been pushing de Blasio from early on. Nobody really noticed that, but I was the campaign manager for Randy Credico, so I saw that going on, and it was curious to me. That's when it was a sure sign that he was going to come up from behind. Anyway, all of de Blasio's main campaign contributors are the same group of supporters of the other pro-war, pro-Wall Street Democratic candidates, including Obama. Soros and George Soros is one of them, and Soros and this crew are not for the people or of the people. De Blasio is not, a Wall Street guy the way Bloomberg was, but he is a real estate guy. De Blasio had a job in the Clinton White House as, like I said, regional director for the Department of Housing and Urban Development for New York and New Jersey from 1997 to 2000. And under his watch at HUD experienced some major scandals involving a rehab loan scam that fleeced HUD out of federally insured loans, far greater than the value of the properties they were said to be rehabbing. This involved something called the 203K program. You guys can look that up, and happened under de Blasio's watch. De Blasio has real estate scandals everywhere he goes, and he's the guy people are putting in charge of building this affordable housing plan in New York. One mortgage company alone was involved in fleecing HUD, and that's our tax dollars, out of $70 million for these rehabs. De Blasio was scurried out of HUD after this $70 million scam, and then, like I said, managed Hillary's U.S. Senate campaign. So he's not only tied to the Clintons, but he's also was tied to Obama. De Blasio's campaign manager during all this was
Daniela. But before you get into that, I want to mention to go back to the HUD scandal. Essentially, what he's doing is they were supposed to be rehabbing some I guess low income housing, but they would charge properties in Harlem. So they would charge HUD more money than it was than it needed to be repaired, right? By large sums. Is this how it worked? Yeah.
Exactly. So if it was $300,000 to repair a burnt out brownstone in Harlem, they would say it was 1.5 million and pocket the rest, essentially. And he was the director of HUD when that was going on. But instead of being fired, he was made by Bill Clinton, Hillary's campaign manager.
Well,
so
one more question before we continue on with the other connections that he has. What was his name when he was involved in all these scandals? Didn't he change his name at one point?
Well, everybody thinks that he had 2 name changes, but he actually had 3 name changes. He started out as Warren Wilhelm, and then he became, I forget his second name. It's something long, and then we know him as Bill de Blasio. But Bill de Blasio is his 3rd name change.
Great. I guess he's trying to appeal to the Italian segment of the city or something with de Blasio. I don't know.
Well, a German sounding Kaiser-esque name is never good in politics. I don't think in America. The Germans did lose 2 wars, so I think they've gone underground in politics.
I think it was a family. De Blasio is like his mother's maiden name, and then he claims Bill comes out of Wilhelm, which was the last name. So it was kind of sort of a family name, sort of made up, but you got the idea.
Well, it's always good to have elected officials with aliases and different names. So, yeah, continue. I didn't mean to derail that. You were going to mention his connections to the Obama campaign.
They should have changed Anthony Weiner's name. That's always funny. It's still funny. De Blasio's campaign manager, right, so was Bill Hires, and he was one of Obama's campaign managers. So, de Blasio is a total Democratic establishment DLC hack. De Blasio is as establishment as they come. I don't know where, him being a progressive besides this, Dickensian rhetoric with the Tale of Two Cities. Other than the rhetoric, he's the total DLC Democrat. The DLC is a conservative Democratic organization, more center-right than progressive. And Clinton also came out of the DLC. So that de Blasio said the right words, and that seems to be enough for people, and he had the right name. And he had the right family.
Or names.
Multiracial family.
Yeah.
What? Or names. He had he had only one right name. He had the right words. He had the right ads. He had the right campaign manager. He had the press on his side. He had the right financiers. And that's enough for people. They don't dig. But I'm wondering how many more of these, artists or dupe artists or whatever you want to call them, it's going to take before people, are so disappointed that they start looking at things like who's financing campaigns and what's really being said instead of the image that's presented. So, I don't know. We've got his affordable housing plan and his pension scandal and his worst slumlords. So, I mean, de Blasio, okay, we can go back into, stay on de Blasio being like an Obama all over again. Because he had the same marketing team behind him. The same, Fifth Avenue marketing machine. And, de Blasio, was somewhat of a Manchurian candidate from the start. He had the 3 name changes, like we said. He said...
Like Obama?
Obama had a name change?
Barry Soetoro and Barry Obama. And
That's right. I always just thought that was something that people... That's true. But why Barack Obama?
Probably just because it sounds more... it's the same kind of a thing where Obama's progressive credentials come more from his image than anything that any promises he made or any kind of a program he had. It's this idea that, even the right wing was kind of worried, he's this dangerous black nationalist. If only he was a black nationalist, that would have been great compared to what he actually is. I think that image would have been harder to create if his name is Barry. So they sort of roughen his edges up a little bit, and like we were talking about this earlier, de Blasio's in a similar way to Obama. Webster Tarpley put it as it's just like a blank screen that you're supposed to project your own hopes and dreams onto. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to say anything. He's put out there by the media as the progressive choice, and you fill in the blanks.
Yeah,
That's a really good point.
with Obama, you had, with the name change, of course, you had the right-wing conservatives, as Kyle mentioned, who were terrified that he was a black nationalist, and you had the left liberals who were all warm and fuzzy inside at the name. And with de Blasio, he's much like Obama. Whatever you want to see in him, it's there. Whatever you want to see, he can mimic that. Much like Mitt Romney too. So, in that sense, coming from the other side. So, yeah, this is how.
But it's interesting what you said about roughing up the edges. That's what they did with de Blasio too. I mean, they had his son with the afro make a lot of the campaign ads. And that appeals to this new idea of populism, or it's trendy, I think, or I don't know.
And what was his de Blasio's famous quote that he was giving a speech to a bunch of donors and said something about like he's not anti-business or he's not anti-Wall Street. What was that one?
Oh, he had a speech to some of the biggest business people in the city one night, and he said that for them not to worry, that he was not a progressive but a fiscal conservative.
Right.
And it was shocking. It was a recorded speech, and he said, "Don't worry, it's all campaign rhetoric. When I get to office, I'm really a fiscal conservative."
I was reading something today. I think it was in the Washington Post. Where they're talking about, you talked about de Blasio and Obama being sort of part of this new faux populism that they're trying to create on the left, and they were discussing this, and let me find de Blasio says, "Please remember, we do not ask more of the wealthy to punish success. We do it in order to create more success stories." So what is he saying, that Lloyd Blankfein is a success story? And it's this sort of mealy-mouthed stuff that, you compare it to FDR, who's saying, they hate me and I welcome their hatred. It's just that the parameters of debate are so narrowly defined that he can say something that sort of sounds like, oh, maybe he likes me, the little guy, too. And it's easy to sell just because in the controlled media, you don't have to have a Randy Credico or, worse than that, like a Webster Tarpley out there setting the other pole of the debate. You pings back and forth between de Blasio and Bloomberg, which is, who cares?
Well, de Blasio's tax the rich plan is so incredibly flimsy, but the way he spoke about it was in these grandiose terms, like it's not to punish the rich. It's all this limited hangout stuff that Webster Tarpley talks about, where you say something bad, but you're really saying something good. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I don't mean to punish the rich. There's no punishment going on. When I looked into this, what this tax the rich plan is, it's one of the flimsiest plans, and it's not even going to pass Albany, so it's dead on arrival anyway. De Blasio, first of all, he has a small tax on people who earn over $500,000 a year, and it's sort of a joke. First of all, there's only 32,000 people in New York City that earn over $500,000 a year, and you think that'd be more. That's 0.9% of the New York City tax filers, and there's no money there. It won't make a dent anywhere close to something like the Wall Street sales tax. Wall Street people laugh at taxable income because their money is all in portfolios and it's not income until they realize it. And also, the rich can always get out of paying their income taxes. They keep their money in different places and they find ways to get out of doing that. And so the only way is to access the giant Wall Street revenue stream is at the source, at the time of the transaction. Higher income taxes is just a farce. I don't know what you guys think about that, but there's a million loopholes to get out of this small 0.05% tax on people making over $500,000 a year. And I calculated the revenue. He's using it for such a small program. It's just for pre-K. And I calculated the revenue, and it would only buy two New York City subway trains or 15 buses. Don't ask me how expensive New York City subway trains are, however, or where they're coming from. They're coming from I don't know, Atlantis. But the point is that it's hardly any money, and
right.
and on top of that, it's not going to pass Albany, and he knew that from the start because he can't impose a tax on New York City without it passing Albany. So he's just going to say, "Oh, it didn't pass Albany's." So
yeah,
and like you said, the income tax Sorry, go ahead, Brittany.
Well, I was just going to say, and with de Blasio's track record, the subway trains are probably going to cost 3 times more than they originally did by the time the taxpayers pay for it. But yeah,
right.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, higher income taxes is a farce. Like, it's like
right.
we were talking about. We need to tax, and Kyle's an expert on this, but tax the revenue stream at the source at the time of the transaction. That's why the Wall Street sales tax is so important. Is so good.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, that they hide it in blind trusts and they put it in, offshore accounts, and it's that Wall Street is where this money goes back and forth over open exchanges. And I mean, Brandon, you wrote about this extensively. That's where the money of the super rich is made, and you need to tax it there and to slowly drain it away and to stop these most dangerous forms, the flash trading and dangerous speculation from taking place in the first place. I think that the idea, back to the whole thing about this new left, Obama is talking about income inequality and, what are the other ways they use to express it? But, just basically that the rich are taking too much of this pie that we all need to share because our resources are fixed or what. It's just sort of all these ways of going around the edges and not really attacking the source of the income of the rich, or, basically don't change the system. Just find ways to shift these minuscule pieces of that wealth over to these areas so that people can be pacified for a short time. But none of these people are ever talking about, are going to talk about something that fundamentally threatens Wall Street, or, taking back the Federal Reserve or something like, those kinds of things you're not going to hear from a mainstream candidate or from a controlled candidate, where anybody who was truly independent is going to quickly realize that the source of this problem is, the Fed is giving $85 billion a month to these huge banks. The banks are allowed to speculate infinitely and just build up this castle of derivatives. The whole thing is completely crazy, but, there's no FDR type of figure that's coming into the picture and really taking it head on. You can't expect an Obama or a de Blasio to just, I think a lot of people sort of held out hope for Obama, and maybe still do, but throughout his whole first term, and continue to, and saying, I trust this guy, and I think he has our best interests at heart. But that's not how it works. You gotta, like FDR did or JFK did, a little more slowly, but you gotta come out with guns blazing. You're not gonna create incremental change by saying, like, we're gonna get a toehold by having a tiny little tax to fund pre-kindergarten or something. He's got to come right out after Wall Street, or come right out demanding, we need interest-free federal reconstruction money for the Sandy stuff, or, you can't take half measures in a depression. You've got to take it head on. And the fact that they don't shows you who's paying the bills.
Yeah. And another nice, comparison there, since we brought up Obama, between Obama and de Blasio, and you mentioned that statement that de Blasio made about, even in that recorded interview where he says that he's painted as a progressive, but he's a fiscal conservative. This reminds me of when Obama was campaigning, and he stated that NAFTA needed to be revisited, and it caused a stir. And then it was found out that he had actually sent a representative to Canada to tell them that no, it's just campaign rhetoric. There's no real attempt to revisit NAFTA. It's all just for the poor people at the bottom who actually believe what candidates say. So,
and then once elected,
same type of speech. We're talking about them fiddling around the edges as if they're actually doing some fiddling around the edges, but their rhetoric is just talking about fiddling around the edges. And when they get into office, they're not doing anything. Like, de Blasio's fooling everyone just like Obama did, and everybody is a dupe again. And I'm just waiting for the fallout of that. If there's going to be any emotional repercussion to that, I like seeing the protests starting.
And Obama does throw out some bones. Like the 2009 stimulus package had some positive features. I think Obamacare has some positive features. People like to to talk about it like it's some grand conspiracy, but for the people who had pre-existing conditions, it's a decent thing. It's a joke compared to just providing Medicare for everybody, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And it's like he has to do enough of those kinds of things to sort of keep his credibility. And then on the side, right after he gets elected, he goes to, what was this? He was meeting with like the Iowa press before, I don't remember if this was before the 2008 election, but basically saying like his mandate is to cut Medicare and Social Security, which all of his voters, had they been listening, would say, what? What are you talking about? I thought we were here to create jobs, or that we were here to get Medicare for all, which was a hot topic back in 2008. They campaign on this illusion, and then immediately their goal is to cut the budget, or their goal is to whatever. So,
well, speaking of the reaction, you've mentioned the protests that are taking place in New York twice now, but I haven't asked you to expand on that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the protests that are taking place and how big they are, and what their main concern is in New York.
Well, they're growing because the big theme of de Blasio's campaign was the stop and frisk thing, because during the election, Judge Shira Shinlin came out and said that stop and frisk was unconstitutional. So all the candidates at that time jumped on board and had something to say about stop and frisk. And Randy was the only candidate who had been fighting it for the last 20 years. He got arrested 5 times with his friend Dr. Cornel West. Again, they went to jail for protesting stop and frisk, and he'd been working on that for many years. But all of a sudden it was in vogue to talk about stop and frisk, and de Blasio was saying the whole time, like I said, he was going to end the era of stop and frisk. And for some reason, the New York press just jumped on and said he's the only one of all the candidates that is going to actually end stop and frisk. Meanwhile, the only 2 that said they would, without a doubt, end stop and frisk were John Liu and Randy Credico. But de Blasio never said that, but the press painted it that way. So he changed police commissioners from Ray Kelly, who was under Bloomberg, to Bill Bratton. Bill Bratton was the police commissioner under Giuliani. And I grew up in New York City, and I remember Bill Bratton being real ruthless when I was a kid. He has this broken windows policy. He was the inventor of stop and frisk, and this, or they call him the architect of stop and frisk, and the inventor of this broken windows policy, which basically means if a kid throws a rock and it breaks a window, what you want to do is you want to arrest him for as long a period of time as possible, because where there's that broken window, there'll be a murder or a rape. It's basically saying small crimes lead to big crimes, so you want to get them in the system as young as possible. And that was his whole philosophy. He got into a fight with Giuliani because they had an ego discord over who was the person who cleaned up New York the most. Was it Giuliani or was it Bratton? So they got into a fight, and Bill Bratton went to Los Angeles. And I was living in Los Angeles for the last 4 years, and there was nothing but protests about Bill Bratton's abuse of the population and his racial profiling in the poorer neighborhoods and inner cities in Los Angeles. So the people really wanted Bill Bratton out of Los Angeles. So de Blasio now came and took back Bill Bratton. Bill Bratton, for the last 4 years, been shuffled between New York and LA, and now he's back. But it was
two
one of those
cities in America that exhibit wonderful police forces, right? The NYPD and the LAPD. That's your model for policing right there.
Absolute worst.
Yes.
There's no fascist country that has anything on those 2 cities. So Bratton's back, and what I think happened was that it just was an issue that resonated after all this kind of Obama emotionality, like the Tale of 2 Cities, and I have a black son, and he did this television commercial where he says to his black son, there's going to come a time, son, when you're going to get stopped and maybe frisked. And the son says, I know, Pop. And it was like this type of thing, right? The whole election was built around this, and all of a sudden he hires this old guy who looks like, the right hand of a Mussolini or something. He looks like one of these wizened kind of, the way, kind of forgetting his name, Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, just looks evil, or Kissinger just looks evil.
Yeah.
So you look at a Bratton and you're just like, God, that's the guy I don't want to be my prison warden. So this guy's like out of Hollywood casting for the negative prison warden. So here he comes back next to de Blasio. Gone is the black family, and now is the Gestapo guy. And the ghettos in New York City just erupted. And there's protests all through Harlem and the Bronx and East New York. And they're saying, we don't want de Blasio, and de Blasio's another Obama, and we've been lied to. And it happened faster because during the protest they're saying, de Blasio lied about picking Bratton, but they're immediately going to, he's another Obama, we've been lied to, we won't be dupes any longer, and that's what their signs are reading. And I'm finding that very interesting. So they're starting to also investigate his other issues now. And saying, well, what else has he lied to us about? What's this affordable housing going to be? What's this other stuff going to be? And I think the most vulnerable people to this media hype are the progressives on the left. I want to make this point. Like, I was thinking about this earlier. They'll fall for anything that sounds good. Like, he sounds good. And that's, I don't know, just what it is. I don't know. And I just don't know how to counter that. I think that's a big point. Like, just keep trying to present facts and information. And I don't see that so much with conservatives, that idea of falling in love with a candidate. Like, I'm not talking about the Ron Paul people because they were a different breed, but conservatives seem to be a little more hard-headed about things than progressives. Like, conservatives will question a little more and tend to be a little more discerning within their own politic. You never hear about a conservative, like, falling in love with something. Like, when I talk to my mother, she's like, I'm just in love with Obama. I'm just in love with de Blasio. She might listen to this and be like, why would you say that about me? Sorry. But progressives will fall for anything just if it sounds good. And I think we need to have a little more cynicism as progressives like they do in the conservative community. And I just can't really point to an example of how any conservative fell in love with somebody. They did with Ronald Reagan, but he had to try 3 times before he won the Republican nomination. And Obama had 2 years in the Senate, and then boom, he's the Democratic presidential candidate because of a bunch of PR hype. And the same with de Blasio. He was like a comptroller, and then he was the Jimmy Stewart of New York. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, and like you said, that the outrage is coming out of Harlem and Queens and wherever, where these are the people who are threatened by this policy. So their safety is at stake, and so they're pissed. It's the same. It's just with Obama, or when you're talking about the progressives, and without trying to be a sociologist about it, the typical progressive doesn't have a lot at stake here. They might not. They've got a middle class or upper middle class income. They're not worried about free trade. They're not worried about whatever. A lot of their homes being foreclosed on, these kinds of things. So I think it's when it's more about what do the people need from the government. And I'm kind of rambling here.
If the listeners take the time to Google what stop and frisk is, or stop and frisk statistics, it's really outrageous, guys. Like, it's something that you can't even believe is happening in America. When I did some research on that, something like every single black or Hispanic male in New York, in the New York tri-state area, will be stopped at least 3 to 5 times and they feel you up and check if you have anything, frisk you, and it's absolute harassment. And it's something like 90% of the people stopped are black or Hispanic, and 10% of them are found to have something on them like drugs when they're stopped and frisked. And then out of the 10% of the white population that's stopped and frisked, 90% of them are found to have drugs or guns. We white people are way far off the radar.
Dangerous white people everywhere.
We white people are dangerous. I was like, whoa, 90% of white people you stop
There was something online I saw where a kid had an audio recorder or used his iPod or something to record a stopping and frisking, and it was brutal. I mean, they're threatening to break his arm and slamming him against the wall. It's not like they just politely ask to show your pockets or something.
No, it's absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
It's an intimidation policy.
The TSA is bad enough.
It's unconstitutional. You can't do that. You can't search a person without cause.
Yeah,
Right.
the TSA is bad enough, but this is the NYPD. Again, I can't stress that enough. That is never a pleasant experience to have to deal with the NYPD. But we've got to take a break right now for station identification. So if you guys will hang on and stick with us for the other side, we'll be right back after these messages.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, you can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV. Also check out activistpost.com and BrandonTurbeville.com. I have two guests on tonight. Daniela Walls, the chair of the Tax Wall Street Party. You can find Tax Wall Street Party at taxwallstreetparty.org. And I have Kyle McCarthy, an activist with the United Front Against Austerity, which you can find at againstausterity.org. And we were talking about the new New York City Mayor, Bill de Blasio, and a lot of the issues that he's brought with him now that he's taken over as mayor. So, Daniela, you had some information also regarding some pension scandals, right, with de Blasio and some pension scandals.
People were really looking forward to two things, which we were talking about earlier, was the end of stop and frisk, which is only going to increase or get worse with this new Bill Bratton. And they were also looking forward to there possibly being a light at the end of the tunnel with some affordable housing finally being built in New York City. And and there's a big scandal now of how de Blasio is going to finance his proposed affordable housing plan that he talked about during the election. He claimed he wanted to build 200,000 units of affordable housing, and he used the word affordable, which is a nebulous word, just like ending the era of stop and frisk, because it's affordable for whom? Like, these units won't be affordable for the people making the $7 an hour minimum wage. So far, the price that I'm seeing for a one-bedroom that he considers affordable is $2,000 a month. And this is a tiered system where he plans to put a few affordable units, and these units are subsidized, into otherwise luxury buildings. This way, the builders that he's buddying up with can get all sorts of subsidies and tax breaks and grab land that was otherwise zoned for other purposes to build their condos. And currently, New York City has a record homeless population, with many of the homeless in New York City shelters hold full-time 40-hour-a-week jobs at New York City's current minimum wage. So that's a huge scandal that needs to be talked about. You need to show that you earn in New York City at least 4 times your rent to qualify for an apartment in New York or the New Jersey area, and there are no apartments that are that inexpensive that a minimum wage earner can qualify in the area for anything, even a studio apartment. So that is why there's so many homeless in shelters right now, even with jobs. And like I said, the most expensive city in the world now has a $7.25 minimum wage, and de Blasio's campaign promise was to hike this to a whopping $9, which isn't good enough, but we're going to have to see if he comes through on this. I'm hoping he will, but it's still not enough. And this affordable housing plan is also a plan for further gentrification and an invitation for the real estate backroom deals we were talking about that he's so familiar with in the first half hour. But here's the scandal with the de Blasio plan that I want to talk about. He wants to direct $1 billion in city pension funds to build these units. So the problem right now in New York is that New York City has one of the country's largest unfunded public pension liabilities. And liabilities means what are owed to current and future retirees. And New York City's pension plan is already massively underfunded. And yet he still wants to take $1 billion out of that and redirect it for his private development interests and to line his buddy developers' pockets. So de Blasio is building these units by stealing it from retirees And like I said, these units are still not affordable. The least expensive one is $2,000 a month for a one bedroom, which none of these people in these shelters or anywhere can, earning a minimum wage or even higher can afford. And so as of a few years ago, New York City had more than $62 billion in unfunded public pension liabilities. That figure is probably higher now. So in other words, they are not even funding a big chunk of their current obligations. Yet de Blasio wants to exacerbate this problem by taking money out of the public worker pensions. And the Rent Stabilization Association of New York said de Blasio's plan would put city workers' retirements in major jeopardy. And the protests are starting there. Members of the public employee unions are up in arms about this because he's taking what little money they have. It's already a liability, like I said. So that's another protest starting that I wanted to talk about besides the stop and frisk protests. And he's only been in office 1 week. So it happened faster than it did with Obama when he appointed all of Wall Street to his cabinet.
What do you think the odds are that these protesters, de Blasio program protesters or de Blasio policy protesters, will actually be able to cooperate with one another? Are there any hints that they're doing that now, or is it still sort of spread out and
Nope,
detached?
there are hints that they are cooperating. Yeah, because I noticed that there's mixtures of issues on the signs. So I don't know exactly if the in public employee unions are combining with the stop and frisk people, but I noticed that at the stop and frisk protest, there's a myriad of different signs saying, "We've been tricked again," Wall Street puppet candidate. I'm seeing that on the posters.
Well, if there's anybody in New York City that listens to this show and you don't know what to do, then maybe getting out of these protests and drawing some connections and trying to put people in touch with one another might be a major step forward, because it's important for movements to cooperate. They've got the same enemy, so there's no point that they shouldn't, no reason they shouldn't be working together.
There's a Facebook page that our candidate started, our ex-candidate, the one who ran for mayor, Randy Credico, called Bill Bratton Was Not the Voter's Choice. And that page keeps a log of the dates and times of protests in New York.
Bill Bratton was not the voter's choice.
Yes,
Yep.
That's the Facebook page. And if you also type into YouTube, Bill de Blasio protests, anything like that, there should be a bunch of protests. I could look it up now that come up from a thing called New York City Guerrilla Group or something, and they've got a website. So I could find that and give it to you at the end of the show.
Yeah, if you could find that, that'd be great. In fact, while you're looking for that, I will go ahead and throw out another rumor that I've heard about de Blasio in regards to his campaign. Right, I should say de Blasio, if that's his real name, which it isn't. His entire persona is just completely fake, and there's much rumor regarding de Blasio's marriage, right? His convenient marriage, that his wife wrote an article back in I believe it was the 70s, where for Essence magazine, entitled "I Am a Lesbian." Right, so you wonder what kind of marriage is this? Is this a marriage of convenience? Is this a political marriage? It's just very very questionable. A lot of people have had rumors about de Blasio's own sexuality or what this is. It's something to think about. But again, there's no that's kind of just speculation. But I thought I'd throw that out there for the listeners.
Well, I was a campaign manager, and the campaign managers all became close in the thick of things during that mayoral race. And I don't like to talk about people's personal lives, but like I said, it really was a Manchurian candidate situation. She was was a proud lesbian, and then I think Bill de Blasio was the first man she claimed to have been with, and the rumor was that he was not straight himself, and it is a marriage of convenience, is what I heard, and what everybody claimed they knew. on the street. So I don't know. I think that speaks to like the name change. I don't care what anybody does in their bedroom at all, but I think it speaks to the whole image. It's a brand. It's all branding. You know, and who uses their child in the first place, black or white, to make a campaign ad saying vote for my dad because he's this and he's that. And, you know, there's problems going on in that house. I mean, the daughter, Kiara, just went to rehab for drugs. And, you know, it's not what we were sold, this kind of, like I said, It's a Wonderful Life, Dickensian fairy tale that Madison Avenue sold us. Mm-hmm. These are political people who were branded and molded by political operatives and big PR marketing machines, and were backed by billionaire hedge fund, you know, entrepreneurs. And it's not a person rising from the middle of nowhere, pulling themselves up from their bootstraps. These are people who were in the Clinton administration and have been in politics since the beginning.
Yeah, and those
in the importance. Sorry,
I was just going to say those are the same rumors that I've heard, and that's another Obama parallel too with the whole marriage situation. Yeah. So yeah, continue, Kyle.
Oh yeah, they do say that about Obama as well. That's true, that he is a homosexual. See, we don't know.
And the reason that it matters is, you know, people like to say, well, that's none of my business, but it is your business if that issue is being used to blackmail that person, and that could go for, you know, Elliot Spitzer having dalliances on the side, or, you know, it doesn't have to be just a homosexual thing, but if someone has skeletons in the closet, they are more easily manipulated because they don't want those skeletons coming out and ruining their political career.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very funny with politicians. Like, whenever I hear of, like, my male artist friends talking about things they get up to, it's never anything like you hear when a politician, when scandal comes out about a politician. It's always like caught with 2 young boys in an airport bathroom smoking crack. It's just horrible stuff. Like when the worst of my male friends come to me, they're like, oh, you know, I met 2 women. Or I cheated on my girlfriend. It's kind of like, oh, you're a terrible person. But then when you come out with a politician scandal, I mean, look what we dealt with Wiener during this election. Mm-hmm. Who in the world do you know that flashes their wiener on Twitter? This is unheard of. This is unheard of, but these people are kind of sociopaths, and they're sexual deviants, and maybe they look for people like that they can say, you do our bidding, or else we're going to come out and expose the situation.
Yeah.
Could that be possible? I don't know.
Yeah, it's quite possible, and in fact, you know, when you look at this whole situation with, you know, whether it's Obama, whether it's de Blasio, you look at this entire image that's been created and promoted by the media and funded by people like Soros and funded by very wealthy real estate owners and investors in New York and financiers and stuff. You have to wonder, is this a color revolution? And maybe you guys could speak to that. Is that what we're looking at? Is this another citywide color revolution?
I just want to interrupt really quickly and tell you that if your listeners look up Guerrilla News New York City, you'll find the protests against de Blasio and where to. Guerrilla News New York City. Just Google that, and there's YouTube clips, and they have a Facebook page.
I think it might be a liberal use of the term color revolution. I mean, if we're talking, you know, specifically about what is a color revolution, you go back to, you know, Otpor in Serbia, or there's the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, or the Rose. It's almost like a Cold War that the U.S. is financing through these NGOs like National Endowment for Democracy or Freedom Works or whatever. They are funding something that looks like a popular movement to overthrow a pro-Russian leader of the country and install a pro-European or pro-Western government. You know, so you overthrew Milosevic, and then who else? You know, you bring in Yushchenko in Ukraine, and they had similar attempts in Iran they had a similar attempt in China with this Jasmine Revolution. So it's kind of like, you've got these flash mobs where they're using Twitter. You've got, the fawning youth in the streets, and there's a lot of media manipulation to it. I think it's maybe more fair to say that the Obama campaign was a color revolution. Not quite the same, since we don't have the same kind of system, but I think de Blasio might be a mini version of that same kind of a thing, but I'm not sure if I would say it had the same, had sort of the same mass traction. And maybe part of that is because the electorate has wisened up a little bit, but I don't know, maybe part of it is just it's not quite the same kind of a situation where, you're not overthrowing the dictator Bloomberg. It's just sort of a normal election cycle. But,
like I said earlier, I think de Blasio was less of a color revolution and more of a beta test for where the Democratic Party is going to go. Because unlike Obama, where you had people crying in the streets, the media made it look like people were really overwhelmed by de Blasio coming in, and it was much more exciting than it was. But on the ground, people really didn't care. There was the lowest voter turnout in 50 years.
Well, and we talked about this earlier, even with Obama, people didn't care about Obama until, and basically until the Democratic primaries were a foregone conclusion. Even in Chicago, people were not very interested in what he was doing. And, Edwards was still, if you look at like the Hillary Clinton or the John Edwards campaigns, they were not color revolutions. Like, you don't see any of these same sort of techniques being used. You don't quite see the same, well, maybe some of the same backers behind Hillary or whatever, but it was just really, once Obama was the Democratic nominee, that the media turned up the pressure and people just lost their minds, and they were going, at the inauguration.
Yeah, I remember you saying that at the inauguration it was more like a color revolution.
Yeah, I mean, people, and I was, I was working in downtown Chicago at the time, and people that I worked with who didn't care about politics one week, the next week are, crying tears of joy because Obama's been inaugurated. And it's, these are the same people that weren't listening to when I was warning them about Obama, the moment he stepped in the race. It's just, I think that the media element in the U.S. is hugely important, whereas in some of these maybe less media-saturated countries, it's more about social media and more about hitting the streets. I think in the U.S. it's got a lot more to do with just the mainstream media.
Kyle and I have been trying to address how the audience can easily make out the difference between a color revolution and a real revolution, or these demagogue politicians like we've been talking about tonight, put out there with false promises, versus a leader in service to the public or a program. And basically asking ourselves the question, how do you get people not to buy into these color revolutions and fall for them? What do you think, Kyle?
I mean, how you get them to identify one, I guess, is mostly about what is the program or what are the demands being made, and not even so much what are the critiques that they're making. And this gets into a lot of different, how you identify a real independent media from a controlled one is just, it's easy to make a criticism or it's easy to point out a problem, but it gets into what is the solution? What is their programmatic response to this problem? And, you can see some people, like, I would consider Elizabeth Warren to be, more or less a real fighter for the American people. She's got a pretty odious foreign policy outlook where she's very pro-Israeli and kind of hawkish, and it's a similar thing with Hillary Clinton. But on the economic stuff, from day one, her very first proposal was this bank on students thing, where she's saying we're going to force the Federal Reserve to refinance all federal student loans at 0.75%. That's a pretty significant thing when you compare it to, I don't know, a lot of other people out there where they're saying, whatever, we're going to try to, even like Bernie Sanders, who's been around for a million years, and his big thing is, well, we're going to try to close corporate tax loopholes. It's just these more vague things, or these people that want campaign finance reform, or or these kinds of things. You got to look for someone with hard-hitting economic demands that will actually work and make sense and are the biggest, thing that you can go after. And I guess, like, the other question being, how do you prevent them from happening? I think you need to reduce the gullibility of the population, and that's the hardest part to inoculate people against this kind of stuff. And I guess that's what people like Brandon are doing in the independent media. That's what we're trying to do on Facebook and whatever else we're doing.
Maybe it's something like what Webster said in his 2014 address for the work that needs to be done in 2014, when he said that it's not about following a personality or it's never going to be something utopian. That revolution. I thought that was very interesting. And quote me, I don't have the quote in front of me that Webster said, but he said that revolutions were things that were grim, and they were there for the survival of civilization. And revolutions do need leaders, and it's not leaders in an egotistical sense, or leaders with, it's not egoism. When Occupy said we're leaderless, a leader is simply somebody that's in service to a program. And
and to go back to Franklin Roosevelt, he likes to, a lot of people in the independent media and the truth movement like to kick him around with conspiracy theories, basically, like that, he orchestrated Pearl Harbor or whatever it was. And from his very first inaugural, here's a quote. I'll try to make this quick. He says, "I shall ask the Congress for one remaining instrument to meet this crisis, broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency, as great as that power would be given to me if we were invaded by a foreign foe." And he's basically saying, I'm taking power and I'm going to kick ass on your behalf. And from day one, he's waging the New Deal. He's coming right out and telling you what he's going to do. He's got a program and he goes and does it. It's a lot different than Obama saying, we need shared sacrifice, or we need to come together, or whatever it is.
Well, we as a society now, or as Americans, we need to stop getting behind these personalities that they throw up in the media and come out of nowhere, whether it's Russell Brand or it's Bill de Blasio. And we need to train ourselves. If we're under economic dictatorship right now and we're in a big depression, we need to train ourselves, while it might not be as fun or as glamorous or as easy to digest, to get behind an economic platform instead of a person.
Right.
And the person we should be looking at is just somebody who defends an economic platform as a service. We should be looking at people who do service, not people who are saying, "Oh, let's all go to the jungle and take ayahuasca and have a consciousness revolution,"
And speaking of platform, guys, we're about to run out of time here, and I'm going to have you back up next week. We're actually going to talk more about the mass movements and mass upsurge, personality cults, color revolutions, all that kind of stuff again next week. But we've just got a little bit of time left, so I want to give each of you about 30 seconds to tell the audience about your organizations. Daniela, why don't you go first, tell everybody about the Tax Wall Street Party, and then Kyle, why don't you tell everybody about the United Front Against Austerity?
You can read our platform at taxwallstreetparty.org. Tax Wall Street Party actually comes out of Kyle's United Front Against Austerity, so we're like the sister organization, and we are a legal political party, and we have candidates for Congress in 2014. They're going to make their announcements soon. And if you want to become a founder of this new party, we started a social networking site for new founders, and it's working out quite well. And you can be a member of that by emailing me. It's by private invitation only. So email me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail, taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com, and give me your email address, and I will add you to the founders' private social network. And then read our program. Please take the time to read it at taxwallstreetparty.org. Thank you, Brandon, for having me on.
And if Tax Wall Street Party is the electoral arm, UFAA is basically the think tank. We're doing propaganda on Facebook and Twitter. We're putting out articles when we can. We're doing, in-person demonstrations and interventions. So you can check out what we're doing at againstausterity.org, or on Facebook. It's facebook.com/United Front Against Austerity.
Awesome, guys. Thanks thanks for coming on the show. We're going to have you back up next week to talk about more action-based information, and we're going to look toward the mass upsurge in 2014, 2015, 2016. And we'll talk to you again next week, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening in. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.